Hey, so good to see you, even though I can't see you. It's another beautiful day in the neighborhood, and I'm so excited that you're here. Bible study with the DeafBlind Potter. If you don't know who I am Kelvin Crosby, and I tell you, we're studying the book of Luke, and I'm super excited about this. This is turning out to be really, really cool. I honestly have never really studied Luke at this in depth, and I tell you, I'm learning a lot. So, are you ready to go on this journey with me? Let's do this. Alright. Let's get all that noise in there. So the book of Luke. Hold on. I won't drive you too crazy with all my noise. But the book of Luke is really interesting. Because back in the time this was written, Luke was a doctor. Well, doctors back then, a lot of times were slaves. Isn't that an interesting thought? And if you had a lot of times people that had doctors that had their own physician, and they were able to help with medical stuff and all that stuff, and so that's where, if you're thinking, we don't really know the status of Luke on this, but if you think about it, you know, this is something that he probably was kind of familiar with as well. If you think about it as well, Luke, when he wrote this, there's a debate, right? There's a debate who's writing into the great Sinopolis. I can't say that word right, but or was he just writing it to the Christian church? We don't. I mean, some people debate that. I'm not going to have that conversation. But what's interesting, as he writes this letter, he's really trying to give a clear representation of the gospel, and I find it so fascinating how he really wanted to make sure, like he wasn't one of the apostles that he wasn't with Jesus when he got this from an account from different stories and people's stories and build the book of Luke. And it's the only book in the Bible the only book in the gospel that the author didn't have the direct encounter with Jesus. Because Luke learned this all through Apostle Paul and part of his ministry and so forth. And if you didn't know, Luke also did the book of Acts. So that covers the first probably 3 or 4 verses. I can't remember, because if you know me, the way I read the Bible, I read it by audio. So when you read audio in Bibles, there's no verses. But for the most part, there's 80 verses in the first chapter of the book of Luke. But we're going to only cover about 29 verses. And so once we jump down, it starts with this man named Zechariah. What's interesting about Zechariah, he is a descendant of Aaron. Well, who's Aaron? Back when the Israelites were running away from Egypt, and they got across the the Red Sea, not the Red Sea, whatever the river was, and they come across and so forth. Aaron eventually becomes the priest, right? So that's who Zechariah is descended from, including his wife Elizabeth, which is interesting. We're not going to go into a little bit more of that, but it's just an interesting set of details. And so So Zechariah, being that he was a descendant of Aaron, means that he also had the duty of taking care of the temple. Well, you think about it. From Aaron to Zechariah's time, there's tons and tons of descendants from that. And so they had more people than they know what to do with. And so they ended up having them kind of split it up in 2 shifts a year. So like a handful of group guys would. Let me just take a moment and say this correctly. Basically, with the priesthood and the people that were in charge of the temple from Aaron's descendants, their responsibility twice a year, if they were a relative or part of that line, were to come to the temple and maintain it and take care of it, serve it, and they would do it twice a year. So every 6 months you would go spend a whole week at the temple, offering sacrifices and doing the different temple duties and so forth. And so this is the time frame that this is all happening. And so I'm losing my mind, guys. We're talking about Zechariah. So Zechariah took drew straws, and he ended up being the guy to go into the temple and do the evening evening sin and sacrifice and all that stuff. I might have gotten that wrong, but you can fact check me in the comments. As Zechariah is there, an angel comes and goes, Zechariah, your prayer is going to be answered. This time next year, you're going to have a baby. And Zechariah is like, you got to be kidding me. You got to be kidding me. I'm an old man. My wife is old in age. She's already had menopause. She's already had her hot flashes. How is this possible? And Zechariah said to the angel Gabriel, then give me a sign that this is going to happen. And I would say the angel Gabriel probably wasn't too happy at this point. Wasn't that enough a sign to have an angel there? That he was going to have a baby and name it John? Nope. So Zechariah, or angel Gabriel said, well, because you doubted, you're going to be mute until the day the baby is born. Man. We shouldn't doubt, huh? And what's interesting about this kind of brings up a couple of different interesting things. See, Zechariah, him and his wife, more than likely, had been praying for a baby for years. And when the angel Gabriel said, your prayer has been answered, well, I think they probably had to, at this point, had stopped praying for a baby. Because Elizabeth was too old to have a baby. But this brings up the interesting thing about God. When we pray for something, there's no shelf life on that prayer. Interesting thought, right? Because it might not be on our own timing, but on God's timing. So let's look at the next couple verses from here, and see where this takes us. So Zechariah goes from the temple and goes outside, and everybody's trying to talk to him, like, why did it take you so long? And everybody saw that he could not talk. And they're like, he must have saw a vision, and he was making hand gestures and all this stuff, and everybody's like, what's going on, what's going on, what's going on? And it doesn't really give us much more detail, but he's just doing hand gestures and all that stuff. And so Zechariah goes home after he finished his duties, and then goes home, and Elizabeth gets pregnant. And Elizabeth praises God, thank you for taking this what would you call it? This shame away from me by not having a child. Because back in this time in the world, not having a child, or especially a boy, was in a lot of ways a curse. And Elizabeth was just so delighted, even though she was in her own old age. And I'm hoping I don't lose this piece. Ooh, let's see if we can get it there. Yeah, we did, people. We did it. So Zechariah ends up doing his life, and Elizabeth has her baby. It says that she went in isolation for 5 months, and really nobody knows why. There's some ideas. Maybe that she was having complications and she wanted to make sure John was going to be born and so forth. And it came time to have the baby. And the baby's born. And so when the baby was born, everybody was like, it's gonna be named Zechariah, because that's just, back then that's what you did. You just name everything after your parents. And nope. And Elizabeth said, no, his name is John. And then they didn't believe her, so they went straight to Zechariah. And Zechariah says, no, his name must be John. He wrote on a tablet. And as he writes that, his voice comes back to life, and he can speak again. And it says that he prophesied and praised Jesus for this miracle that he has just gone through, you know? And I just think it's such an amazing story. Sorry. Just trying to get this clay off the wheel. It's just such an amazing story. How God can use you no matter how old you are, how young you are. And he had a plan for you no matter what your age is. And what's interesting is God knew what he was doing. He knew Zechariah could handle it, and Elizabeth could. And what's cool, and we'll find out more later in the coming days or coming weeks as we get deeper into our study with John, that God ended up using John for a whole different purpose than what a normal child would be. John was to come and prepare the way for the Almighty Jesus. Isn't that a cool idea? That was already being prepared before Jesus was going to come to the earth. You're going to have to wait until next week to get the rest of this story, because that's when we get to learn more about John, Elizabeth, and who John is. And we also get to learn about Mary, which is going to be an incredible thing that we get to have a conversation about. So, alright, my friends, that wraps up the Bible study with the DeafBlind Potter. As I always say, go live, be on your challenges, and I'll see you next week.